Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Ria. I'm going to be hosting this webinar, and Fatima is going to take you through the content of it. We're just waiting for a couple of people to get in. I'm seeing people come in the waiting room, so let's just give it a couple of minutes before we get started proper. Before we get started, how many people are here for the second or the third time? Just plop it into the chat box. Welcome to the people who are here for the second or third time, and also welcome to the first timers. Nice. Thank you, Nicole. In the interest of time, shall we just get started, Fatima?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get started.
Perfect. So today's webinar is all about starting podcasts for your company. For those of you who have been here for the first few webinars, we talked about how to start a podcast on a budget and then how to gain an audience. And this one, we're going to talk about like what's the value of starting one for, as a corporate, as an organization or as a company, not just a personal one. So just a little bit of background on Fatima. For those of you who are here for the second or third time, Fatima is the co-founder and CEO of Quill, which is a one-stop shop for all of your podcasting needs. And she is going to be the one leading this session today. Fatima is a PR veteran. She has started, a bunch of businesses. She's spoken on world stages as a keynote speaker, and I am just very, very thrilled to be doing this with her. My name is Ria Riaz. I am the head of marketing at a tech startup here in Toronto called Mesh Diversity, and we've launched our own podcast. I've launched a few podcasts, so I'm like just really willing to listen and offer some insight to this as well. And a bunch of house rules before we get started. So you may have noticed that as you logged in, you didn't have access to like unmute your microphone, or your video was turned off. It's up to you if you want to get it started. For the sake of bandwidth, we keep it off most of the time. And we will be taking questions throughout the session. You can plop it into the chat box at any given time, and we will make sure that we answer all of them at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to Fatima.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Ria. Really appreciate that intro. Ria is one of our freelancers on the Quill platform, and she's amazing. Our clients love her, and I'm just really grateful that she wanted to moderate today's session. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe during these unprecedented times. We've been getting a lot of requests at Quill, and so that's why Ria came up with the idea to do a webinar series. Our first one was how to launch a podcast from home. Really successful. I think we had over 100 people turn up. And then our second one was how to grow your podcasting audience. And today what we're going to be talking about is why you should consider launching a podcast for your brand, and also some best practices on doing so. I'm in the interest of audio quality, I'm actually going to stop my video and share screen so you can all take a look at my presentation. Ria, is this like, can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, great. Great. So for those of you who don't know, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Quill, which is the world's first marketplace for podcasters. So if you are an indie podcaster or a corporate company looking to start a show or outsource elements of your show, we are your one-stop shop. You can go onto our platform and hire a range of different freelancers at different price points. That you can hire for any services that you might need, whether it's full service, audio editing, a logo, a website, production, or in general, the full package. Of course, now you know what I look like, but that is my sexiest headshot. So of course, I wanted to include it into my slide deck. I'm also the co-founder of the Listen In Conference, which is one of the world's first enterprise conferences for podcasting. It was supposed to be June 25th, and it unfortunately has gotten pushed to October because of COVID. Our headliner is Sarah Koenig, the co-host and creator of Serial. And this entire event is about supporting brands who are looking to move into podcasting. So just wanted to start off with some, industry stats. We are currently at 1 million podcasts as of this week. So it's quite a remarkable milestone in our industry because, 200,000 of those podcasts have been added in the last 90 days. So COVID, I think, definitely has spiked the not just podcast consumption, but podcast creation as well. And I think people are starting to look at it as a very serious medium to add to their marketing mix. I don't think podcasting will ever be your broadest reach tactic, but it will definitely be a great addition to your marketing mix and a really great way of reaching a niche audience that could potentially lead to very high conversions. I've actually written a number of articles about why brands should get involved in podcasting and what are the benefits. So after this webinar is over, I'm going to actually email everyone a recording of today's session. I'm going to send everyone the slide decks, and I'm going to send some additional resources your way that will help you, further make a decision if you're contemplating whether or not you want to launch a podcast for your company. So first and foremost, I think it's important to get started. Many companies, I think, take their time deliberating whether they want to launch a show without actually realizing the missed opportunity costs you face by not getting started. While you're hesitating and contemplating, I feel a lot of your competitors could be well on their way to executing their own podcast. And despite what some people think, it isn't very expensive to get a podcast off the ground. So why not test the tactic, like you do for traditional media and other marketing options. I think it's important to start lean by hiring freelancers on a short-term basis to see if podcasting generates an ROI and the traction that you hope for. And get started, track your progress, figure out whether podcasting is worth the investment. And so, interestingly enough, I, had this conversation with a lot of companies where they not only think it's a lot of work to get a podcast started, which it definitely is work. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but people think it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a show off the ground, and that's actually not true at all. That's one of the reasons I launched Quill, so that people could go directly to the sources and freelancers to get support on getting their shows off the ground. And it's really just branded podcast series are a really, really great way of reaching new audiences in new places, in particular, educated millennial professionals, and a really great way of marketing your products and services in a way that you're not overproducing commercials and overselling, but working it naturally into your content. I consume, on average, 10 podcast shows a week, and I would say at least 50% of those podcasts are branded podcasts. And I've actually found significantly after listening to a lot of branded shows that I've found myself purchasing products and services off of those after listening to those podcasts. These companies become thought leaders and subject matter experts in a particular area, and leading me to, become a huge fan of McDonald's after listening to The Sauce, or wanting to download Slack after listening to Work in Progress and Slack Variety Pack, or, knowing way more about McAfee after listening to Hackable. And so companies are, so much more personalized, and you get to know their story so much better and develop more brand loyalty and a brand connection when you actually get to know the host and the story behind the company. And so I think it's a really great opportunity for you to consider. And a lot of our clients that we work with on the enterprise and corporate side use podcasting as a form of lead gen. So if you are looking to prioritize sales, what better way to get in front of industry experts, stakeholders, and prospective clients than having a podcast that's related to your industry, where you can actually invite people out to interview them, or to get their thoughts and organically build a relationship with them. We have so many clients that have started podcasts who have come around and said to us, we would never be able to get an hour with the CEO of Shopify, or, you know, the chief operating officer of the startup that we've been trying to lock down for so long. But podcasting is a really great way to do that, because everybody is looking for coverage and everybody is looking to tell their story. So I think it's important to understand, when you are starting a branded podcast series, to provide value for your consumers. It's an opportunity for a company to get right into the ears of the very people you hope to reach. But you need to provide valuable content in order to retain an interest engagement. Podcasts are not designed for bombarding listeners with sales messages and blatant commercials. And doing so, I find, will only lead to disengagement and could provide like a lot of backlash. Ria, I think I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Would you be able to mute yourself? I can still hear it. I'm not sure if there's somebody on the webinar that hasn't been muted. There we go, much better. So while it is fine to plug products and services from time to time, I think it's important to remember that it has to come across as extremely organic. And an example that I always love to give people, if you're trying to figure out a way to launch a company podcast and do it in a very natural and organic way, listen to Hackable by McAfee. They've done a really, really good job of promoting their products and services, but in a way where it's not overproduced and forced down you, but it's just done in a very tasteful way, but still alluding to the fact that they are thought leaders in their fields and staying top of mind with customers. This is also an important step that I find a lot of companies miss when starting their podcast, is to create an ideal listener profile. It's better to be something to someone rather than everything to everyone. And so I always recommend, in order to keep producing engaging and valuable content, audience information is crucial. So who are they? What age range are they? And what kind of content do they want to listen to? And it isn't necessarily like, your podcasting audience doesn't necessarily have to be your customer audience. It would be great if it was. But remember, like, a lot of people, unfortunately, the baby boomers aren't tuning into podcasts. Mostly it is millennials and some Gen Z. And so, you know, if you have a product or service that's exclusively for baby boomers, then maybe podcasting isn't the right medium for you. But if you do have a product where you've mostly been targeting, I don't want to use the word an older generation, but I don't know how else to put it, and you realize that you want to reach new audiences in new ways, and millennials fall into that bracket and category, then definitely I think trying a podcast is a really great investment, keeping in mind that now millennials account for almost 75% of the workforce with purchasing power and decision-making power. Analytics are extremely important to compare ideal listener profiles with data from the company's existing website and social media accounts. So once you figure out who your audience is, you'll be able to better identify the types of topics that will resonate with them, what could be valuable, how you can target them with your podcast, how you can advertise to them online. And like I mentioned, keep in mind that the profile of listeners can be different from usual consumers. And this is really a blessing in disguise, as it shows that podcasting is reaching new audiences who may represent future customers. Before I move on, do we have any questions so far? We're happy to take questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to drop them in the chat, and Ria can stop and interrupt me. So hopefully, if you do decide to launch a podcast and you have some resources where you can hire people and experts to set you up, but if for any reason you don't have the bandwidth to hire external support and podcasting experts, then I feel like I should probably mention that you should be using iTunes tags to set up RSS feeds. For those of you who are new to podcasting, an RSS feed contains information about a podcast and its episodes, which is passed on to podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, enabling listeners to tune into the show. So think of it as like a unique URL specific to your podcast. The link to an RSS feed can either be generated by a company's website or a podcast host provider like a Buzzsprout, a Libsyn, a Simplecast, a Podbean. Setting up a feed and choosing relevant keywords as tags will encourage SEO, and it also allows podcasts to appear in more searches in directories and apps like the iTunes Store, helping to convert listeners. I also recommend visiting SoundCloud for a simple step-by-step guide to setting up an RSS feed. And also I should add that I'm actually doing a 2-hour workshop tomorrow where I'm walking people through how to set up RSS feeds, how to set yourself up on a hosting platform, how to get your distribution set up, and also how to set up your analytics, including smart links. I know a lot of people don't have resources and can't necessarily hire people, so I'm going to be doing a screen share tomorrow during my workshop and actually walking you step by step on how to take like each step into account, including the tags and the RSS feeds. After the webinar is over, when I follow up with you in an email, I'll actually drop the workshop link in there as well in case you're interested in attending. So one of the best things about a branded podcast for your company is that you know normally at the time that you decide to launch a podcast, you already have a really great brand following. And so you should be leveraging your customers, you should be leveraging your email marketing list, and you should also be cross-promoting with partners. I find that the majority of podcasts lack direct competitors in the conventional sense, with individual podcasts and show genres attracting their own specific tribes and fans. So whenever people talk about competition in podcasting, I don't really buy it, because I think that we don't really have competition in the conventional sense. In order to be exposed to new listeners, you have to seek out podcasts whose content resonates with yours, no matter how indirectly, and partner with them to cross-promote each other's shows. So there's a few different ways that you can do that. Right now I'm working with a really large bank. They've launched a pretty disruptive podcast in the tech and innovation space. And what I've been doing the last few weeks is actually reaching out to podcasts that have a similar dedicated listener base, whose content we think would be very relevant and resonate with our listeners as well. And we've either been cross-promoting or we've been renting their RSS feeds so that the podcast episodes that we create show up in their podcast feeds. This can sometimes be costly, but I find it's often worth it if you have budget, and it's worth it if you're trying to reach a very designated listener base. And if you don't have budget, that's totally fine. You can find organic ways to partner with other podcasts. You can check out Radio Guest List for a list of podcast hosts that you can reach out to directly. You can do content swaps with podcasts that have blogs and resources. You can, reach out to relevant event series, now virtual, but, otherwise live events as well, and see if, you could potentially partner with them. There's a lot of ways that you can, get creative that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money. So because you're a branded podcast, when we did this webinar a few weeks ago, we were talking about how to launch a podcast on a budget when you at home, if you're an indie podcaster. And so for recording and audio editing, these are two categories that I do not, for a branded podcast, recommend that you use free platforms like Anchor. So I'm not even putting it in here, because Anchor, while it is free, is low quality production and low budget editing. And so that's going to be reflected in the quality of your overall show. And you never want to compromise brand value when you're creating a branded podcast. And so my advice always when it comes to recording and audio editing is hire people that can support you. If you definitely still want to, look at free options, we actually have many blogs written on the Quill website that outline which audio editing options you should be using or recording options you should be using. Given that it's COVID right now, and I know people can't necessarily set up their own equipment or go into studios, I recommend using platforms like Zencastr, which generally is $20 a month, but right now it's free during COVID for up to 10 hours a month. And another platform that I've started using recently for our clients, which I really, really love, is CleanFeed. I find that their audio quality is amazing. They charge $50 a month, but if you're a branded podcast, definitely worth the investment. supplement that with purchasing a podcast mic like the Blue Yeti or the Snowball. There's like so many different options out there, and you can check out this blog to find some equipment. And if you don't have the budget to purchase a podcasting mic, then at least make sure you're wearing headphones, as they have a built-in microphone. At the very least, you should also know that audio editing isn't actually that expensive. I think people think that they would have to spend a lot of money to hire an expert to put in some intro and outro music or help them record transitions and signposts. That's actually not true. Like, you can find people on our platform for as cheap as $40 an hour who can help you, just really take your podcast episode to the next level. Ria, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, just sorry to go on a quick timeout, but I'm getting some emails from people saying that they didn't actually get the webinar link. So while I continue, do you think you could maybe? Amazing. Great.
Yep.
Am I good to continue?
Yep. I am just going to send it out through Eventbrite again.
Great. Sounds great. All right, so another thing to remember when you are distributing your podcast, and this is something I'm definitely going to cover in the workshop tomorrow, but podcast listeners are very loyal to their respective apps. So I exclusively only use Apple Podcasts. So if a podcast isn't on Apple's app, then I'm not even going to bother listening to it. And similarly, most podcast listeners are very loyal to whatever platform that they're comfortable with. And so you really want to make sure that you're maximizing distribution. So make sure that you're creating a Linktree account. It takes 5 minutes. And essentially what a Linktree account is, it links your podcast URL to all of the different distribution apps. So when people click on the podcast link, it actually takes them to whatever app it is that they're using. I've included the URL in the slide deck that I'll send around. And it also includes, I've included the page where you would go, where it gives you, lists out the instructions to create a link tree. But this is something that I notice a lot of people don't do with their podcast distribution, and you're leaving a lot of I find you're leaving a lot of listeners on the table by doing this. So make sure everybody is creating a Linktree account, and it's very easy. The steps are very simple. So one of the biggest questions that I always get asked when it comes to hosting platforms and when it comes to podcast distribution is, what hosting platform should people be reaching? So for those of you who are new to podcasting, and I apologize if you're not, once you have your completed edited files, the first thing that you have to do is sign up for a hosting platform. That generates your RSS feed. Once you have your RSS feed, you can distribute your podcast to different platforms like Spotify, Apple, and Google Play, and get your podcast on different directories. So there's a ton of different hosting platforms that you can use. Anchor is obviously free. Libsyn's $5 a month. Podbean starts at $9 a month. The one that I highly recommend is Simplecast. I think the basic version is $15 a month, but the premium version is $30 a month. If you are a brand, you should 100% be going to signing up for the premium version, which is around $30 a month. And the reason I recommend signing up for Simplecast is because, for starters, I find that the user interface is a lot easier to work with, and distributing your podcast is a lot easier. For a lot of the hosting platforms, you actually have to manually go into Apple and Spotify and Google Play to actually submit it. But for Simplecast, there's literally just a drop down where you have to go and you can send your RSS feeds to the different distribution platforms. So if you're looking for something to make your life easier, the extra $15 or $20 a month is totally worth it. And then, of course, make sure that you're getting on all of the different platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google Play, but there's a lot of different options as well. And if you do tune into our workshop tomorrow, we will be covering hosting platforms, distribution, and also setting up your analytics. Most brands aren't necessarily looking for monetization on their show, but if you do decide that you want to get into sponsorship and ad slots, and especially if you have a large or niche brand following with high engagement, then you need to make sure that you're setting up your analytics properly from day one, and that means including smart links. So smart links are trackable URLs that automatically reroute people to your podcast from their favorite listening apps, and they're really great at tracking actual clicks and listens. I use smart links to try to figure out which of my marketing tactics are actually working so that I can double down on my efforts. And so, if you are doing a trailer for your podcast, or if you're doing a contest, or in general, if you're just putting out weekly episodes, you should, other than having your Spotify analytics and your Apple or iTunes analytics set up, you should also make sure you have smart links set up on Chartable through your hosting platform like Simplecast to make sure that you're tracking exactly who it is that's tuning into your show, tracking, demographic, geographic location, any profile or ideal listener profile information you can collect, because that's what brands look for when deciding who to advertise with. And also keeping in mind that Spotify and Apple both have features where you can look at customer retention. So you can see where customers start listening, stop listening, where they skip, which helps you further understand and draw insights. What kind of content do they like? What kind of format do they like? And you can further customize your content for them for ongoing episodes and links. And so the last thing that I wanted to touch upon here is don't be afraid to hire people to support you through your podcasting. Whether it's people off of Upwork or Fiverr or Quill, there's a lot of experts out there who are looking for work during COVID, who have a lot of time on their hands. It's definitely, I would say, especially for when it comes to audio editing, I would say go the extra mile and have someone help you and support you with the intro and outro music and just really cleaning up your audio files and enhancing the quality of your show. It really does make a huge difference. Make sure that you are leveraging your existing social platforms. So if you are working for a company or have your own company and you have a large following on either Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, make sure that you're really leveraging those followers when you start a podcast and really driving them to your show as well. So that's very high level. Wanted to cover, best practices for launching a company podcast. I will be sending around additional resources that you should take a look at in case you do need to make a case for starting one for your team or your exec team. I think a lot of the articles that I send over will be really helpful in understanding why I think it's a tactic that everyone should be potentially exploring. And I am always happy to talk about podcasting all day, every day. You can always reach me at my email. If you're looking to work with someone and you're not sure who to reach out to on our platform, feel free to email me and I can jump on a call with you, give you some advice and tell you who you should be reaching out to. And of course, check out our blogs and resources section on our website because we have a lot of different resources on there that you can take a look at. I just actually created a 10-step guide for people looking to start company podcasts, which really walk you through all of the steps required to launch one.
Perfect. Thanks, Fatima. We do have one question. Do you want to go back to video?
Yes, I do.
So I will go back to video as well. So the question is from Jessica, and it says, she has a question about tailoring the podcast content for a short time, like a series within the channel for a smaller niche group of your ideal audience, but still wanting to keep the larger target group long term. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
So I'm just going to read this. I'm going to read this question directly. I have a question about tailoring the podcast. Yeah, that definitely does make sense. So I highly recommend even breaking up your audience into segments and marketing to different segments accordingly. I definitely do think that you can. I think niche content is always extremely valuable. I mean, if you think about this webinar series that we did, we really did factor in that there's people who are going to want to launch a podcast on a budget from home as an indie podcaster versus people who already have a podcast and want to grow their audience versus people who are looking at starting company podcasts. And so I think that's a really good idea. And I think if what you're asking, because I wasn't sure of the question, but I think what you're asking is, would I recommend doing short form content for a subset of your demographic? Is that what you're asking? I think that's what you're asking. And my answer to that would be yes, I absolutely recommend it. And of course, try to make the content valuable for everyone. I mean, if there's things that you can do to try to expand your reach, go for it. But I'm a huge advocate of even breaking down your segment even further. Maybe what you can do is like some sort of a series, like a short series. So every week you touch upon a new topic that can sort of tailor and target a different group every time. Yeah, so I actually don't encourage for branded. If you're an indie podcaster, I would definitely say you should set up your independent social channels for a podcast. But if you're a company podcast, I would say my best practices are not to create separate social media channels. Generally, the rule of thumb is if you are finding that you can drive traction through your existing social channels, then why not leverage your existing audiences already rather than recreating and duplicating work? If you're finding that your content for your podcast resonates with your company, and it should, then what I would do is recommend sticking to your existing channels, your company channels, and just really driving people there when it comes to your podcasting engagement. As long as you're finding the traffic is going in and out and you're finding that the content makes sense with your content calendar, then definitely, and mostly if you look at branded podcasting companies, most people don't have separate social media channels. They leverage their existing channels. So that was D. I think those are all the questions that we have right now. Great. Ria, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, I think I will reach out to everybody with a bunch of resources today. And if you have any individual or independent questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And we're happy to jump on a call and provide further context. We can't hear you, Ria.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, I don't have anything else to add. Like, I have started a few podcasts for companies that I've worked for. And the biggest challenge there has been and always to like consistent content and like, this is forever my life. You will hear.
Don't worry, we don't judge working moms. So what are you supposed to do? The daycares are all shut. So,
yeah. So
this is our life.
Essentially, like the challenge always has been is to consistently produce like really good engaging content and to get all of the audience engaged, because I feel like a lot of businesses have different target groups that they target, and like sometimes it's hard to have like content that speaks to everyone. What do you like, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah. So again, I think email segmenting is really important, and that's where analytics comes in. Really, really hyper doubling down on exactly who your demographic is. Like I really like to break it up into segments and then create content accordingly. So for example, geographic location is a really big one where I like to do segmentation of like my audience and then accordingly target people with content that may be relevant. So actually this morning Esprit, who I believe is on the webinar, sent me a new podcasting festival that just is doing a virtual event, which I thought was really cool. So I actually took our email database and I segmented with people who are geographically in the same area as the event. And I sent them all an email saying, hey guys, check out this event that's happening virtually. It's like available for everyone, but it's happening, like it's been put on by this like organization and group. And so I think just really hyper focusing on your analytics piece and like actually putting out content that would be valuable for everyone and making it an optional, especially now with COVID. I think we're doing a lot of online tutorials and webinars and stuff where people have the option to opt in or out. And with the webinar series, we were really, really clear about what the call to actions and key takeaways and everything were going to be. And so people can really take a look at what are we going to walk away, what are our key learnings going to be, and is this going to be helpful and relevant for us?
Agreed. that is the only question I had.
Okay, well, thanks for joining, everybody. And Ria, thank you so much for moderating. I know it's never easy when you have a kid in the background, so really appreciate it. I'll be in touch later today, and thank you everyone for dialing in, and hopefully see you tomorrow in the 2-hour workshop that we're doing. Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.